we'll let them come. So what is everybody's, AEC, so acoustic echo cancellation. That's today's topic. But out of curiosity, as always, I kind of want to know where you guys are sitting at with AEC. So how many people are currently using AECs or have installed them before, or at least familiar with them, at a 3000 level sort of sense? You can use the chat. You feel free to use your voices, or if you want to turn your cams, that's great too. Know about it. Okay, good. Familiar, right? Yep. Have maybe heard it before. Never. I know what these words are individually. Maybe I know what acoustics are. I know what cancellation is, and I'm pretty sure I know what echoes are. That kind of deal. I've got somebody who's probably more than one person who's never heard of it. So this is going to be super informative for you, hopefully. Okay. Well, acoustic echo cancellation, today we'll talk about when and where you'd even bother using it. We'll go over, I wrote 101, but we're almost starting to get into like a 201 sort of territory here. And we'll talk a little bit about the programming as well. Acoustic echo cancellation is incredibly useful. We're actually using it right now, but it can start to get very mathy and very, very heavy very quickly. So I'm going to try to keep it as best to the best of my understanding to translate it as well as I can so that everybody can get something from this. Because if you want to start doing some more research on this, we've got a white paper on it that I can link in the chat, and I'll also send it out after my normal Q&A email. And you can do a lot more reading, but boy, does it gets tough quick. But it's very fascinating. Okay, so let's jump in here. Okay, first of all, why would I ever need to use this? What is even going on with this thing? Essentially, you would use acoustic echo cancellation, or AEC, if you want to include video conferencing in a room with multiple people and multiple microphones, and you were calling somebody, or if you had somebody that was calling into a space and you wanted to talk back with them, or if really pretty much any time there would be like open mics locally in a room as well as a remote connection. So Teams and Zoom, like we're on right now, is always a really great example of it, especially over the last 18 months or 2 years or so. We've been using Zoom and Teams loads more. So it's actually inside of, so we're in Zoom right now. So it's actually inside of Zoom. And that's what we're able to do. That's the technology that we use so that we can have our mics unmuted and have our speakers playing the sound as well from the Teams or Zoom call without it actually being fed back into the system, because then it would create actually a feedback loop in this case. And that's not good. So Zoom, Teams, they actually have a version of it in the software. And there are cases where that is perfectly okay and totally fine, but there's also, it quickly gets out of hand and we need to think of other solutions. So why not use Zoom or Teams? Well, I'll use Zoom's or Teams acoustic echo cancellation when it's like just me and my computer in a room by myself. If I don't have headphones and I have to play it out loud, I may use it then. As soon as you start having multiple people in a room or multiple calls happening, you really need to start thinking of, okay, this is larger than Zoom was kind of designed for. And there are versions of Zoom that they're called Zoom Rooms, actually, and they're kind of the larger version, but they're still, a software-based sort of software encoder, not encoder, but AEC for this. And so using it again, once you get over, one mic or two mics, you need to start thinking, okay, I need a bigger system that's going to be able to handle all this. So even if you were using Zoom or Teams along with this technology, you may want to use this option, the AEC inside of the HM64, for instance, if you wanted something more robust, something that you had more control over, rather than just a completely automated system where it's just working in the background and you have no idea what's going on. With ours, we really let you get in there and program it and change it exactly to the needs of the situation. And again, as I've said, if you have larger systems where it's not just me in a room with my laptop and no headphones, once you get beyond that, it's like, okay, well, now we need to start doing essentially a lot more math. Okay. On the AHM itself, it's actually, there's a little trap door on top, and you can pop it off and it actually can slide in. It's a little card that slides in. That's where you can do the processing expansions as well. And there's a picture of it. So right up here, it's like a whole separate card, a whole separate processor, actually several processors. But we supply 12 channels of acoustic echo cancellation. So it's got an adaptive filter, it's got noise reduction, we've got automatic gain compensation, which I'll get into. Other key notes of this is that it's 150 millisecond time. And on this card, there's actually 2 FPGA devices. I'm incorporating a dual core ARM processor each. And we do this specifically so that we can do all of this extra math, all of this extra processing on this card and not interfere with the rest of the AHM64. On some other systems, it comes with AEC, ours is optional. It comes on it and in it. And when you're using it, it starts to absorb the processing availability from the rest of the unit. Because ours is this separate chip, we can kind of slide it in and we're not sucking away anything from the HM64 the rest of the way that it's running. So everything else can run as perfectly as normal. We just want to have this extra additional chipset to basically take all of that math and do it for us. So a really good trade-off, especially considering you don't have to give up anything else for it. Let me move this. Let's ask, what does the 150 milliseconds mean? Is it a latency number? 150 milliseconds, it's basically called like the tail time. There's a few different phrases for it, but it's the tail time. It's the window for how long it is able to reduce or eliminate an echo. And I can get into that here in just a second. Okay, so here's a general setup. So it was a little abstract earlier, but here's a lovely visual. So let's assume we've got a local room, and let's pretend that that's us. We're the green people. So we are the green people, and we've got a remote caller coming in. Maybe it's a board member calling in for a conference call, or maybe it's somebody on the other side of the world wanting to be a part of this event, or they're the key speaker and they couldn't fly here for any number of reasons. There are lots of ways that we could do this. But let's say we're the local room and we've got a remote caller. The typical problem is that we have somebody calling and talking, and then we pump it into our room, and it's coming out of our speakers, and it's finding its way back into the microphone that we're using to talk with the remote caller. So the acoustic echo cancelers aim to avoid this by trying to subtract a simulated echo from that local microphone or the signal. And we call that the near end in our software. We're the near end and they are the far end. So if we know the essentially combined response of the speakers, the room, the mic, we can just subtract that from what we're sending over to the remote caller. The hard part is that the response changes over time. So as soon as we move, as soon as the person speaking moves, or if the microphone moves, or for some reason the speakers move, that changes the response of all of these things, this combined response. And so we're having to constantly update basically our mimicking of this response so that we can subtract it and send it over to the remote caller. And again, remember, this is all for the sake of them not hearing themselves come back through our mic. So far, so good. Remember, don't hesitate to ask any questions in the chat. So kind of like a mix minus feed. Sort of. A mix minus is a very discrete, I'm just not sending this part of this mix to them. So kind of, yes. In this case, we're trying to mimic what's happening in the room so we can take out all those extra echoes. So close, almost less. Any other questions so far? Okay. now I'll show you. Here we've got, this is System Manager. You all could go download it right now. It's free, runs on Mac and Windows. This is how we program an interface with the AHM64. So the AECs actually live on the inserts. The near end lives on insert A and the far end lives on insert B. The reason for that is because of dynamics processing and a couple other things that are really detailed in the white paper, but it's essentially to make sure that things are working as well as possible and you don't accidentally change how the AEC functions by using a compressor or a gate. So as you can see here, so we're on insert A on our inputs, and we can assign assign AEC near end. It even lets us know this is what you're about to assign. So there's no way for you to really confuse it as long as you're reading and when you're clicking. If I click over here, let's say I want to assign it, then I've got my 12 possible channels that I can assign to it. And once you assign it, this is what it actually looks like. So I can view the near end and the far end simultaneously, which is really helpful. I can quickly add another AEC channel and make it multi-mic if I wanted to do 3 or 4 mics in a room, up to 12, because I've got 12 channels of AEC available. And we have these kind of little adjustments we can make. I can turn on and off adaptive filters, the echo reduction, the noise reduction, and the duckers just by clicking on the name. And they also have a sliding scale and numbers going on with them. Here it is if you switch views, and now I'm seeing the far end here up top and the near end on the bottom. These are showing the same thing. Let me use my arrows here. They're showing the same thing, just different views, and you can swap back and forth really easy. They're both, you have control over both on both pages. You don't have to stick to one over another. So in essence, if I was going to give like a rule of thumb for these sliding scales, it's the higher the number, the more aggressive this processing block is, the more aggressive it is. So our goal is to typically, we'll have them on, and we want to try to get as low a number as possible while still getting as good of a result as we need. So if you need a 6 and it sounds great, perfect. But if you only need a 3 on the adaptive filter to make it work, even better. The more aggressive we are with it, the harder the AEC has to work. And really the goal is we want to have excellent performance with as little extra additional math as possible. So go back over here. Okay, so this is the layout. This is a signal flow for the AEC. If you go and look at our white paper, which again, I'll have linked in the Q&A email afterwards, you will see this diagram. So there's kind of a lot going on here. There's more acronyms, which we totally love in this industry, but let's kind of just walk through each one. So the really kind of big key components here are the adaptive filter first. So this is what's continually updating to actually figure out, like, what does this room sound like? What am I trying to subtract right now? So the adaptive filter is actually an FIR, a FIR filter, or a finite impulse response, which is a whole different topic of conversation. But essentially, like I said, it's really just trying to imitate the response of the room, the speakers, the mic, everything that's happening. It's trying to imitate that and find out what it actually is. For a typical acoustic echo canceller adaptive filter length of over 100 milliseconds, the computing power really starts to get extremely large, which is another reason why we've made this an additional card, so you can slide it in. And remember, ours is 150 milliseconds. Trying able to get the best results, but not have to suck it away from the AHM64, which may be doing, 40 other channels of processing as well. So luckily, we've got a few techniques for reducing the computational requirement that is we need to apply to the filter and basically make it into the frequency domain. And again, this gets extremely hairy quickly, but we can make a couple of trade-offs with this technique, and it's to help us transform our useful length automatically, but we incur some latency. So when you use an AEC, because we're doing all this extra stuff, we're trying to be as efficient as possible. it just comes with some additional latency. And that's a little bit implied. Like not only when you're doing this conferencing call with a remote caller, latency is just so inherent in it. And now we've got this filter length of 150 milliseconds. The latency is just inherent. Just the computing power needed to do it is just inherent in the system. So another trick we've got with this adaptive filter block is normalization. So dynamics can be a little bit crazy, especially when we're on these remote calls. And dynamically, it adjusts the filter update rate based on the amount of energy in the signal. That's the normalization part. Without the normalization, the system is really sensitive to its operating level. Really small or really low signals are not able to produce significant changes to the filter, but large signals can cause the filter to become completely unstable. So we normalize it so the filter is always seeing about the same level. So we got the adaptive filter, and this is a very excellent and nerdy graph, but it is kind of important, particularly over here on the right hand side. So this process it's called signal whitening, and we essentially add it because if we have some more, the closer our signal is to white noise, the better our processing can eliminate echoes and cancellations. So if we add a little bit of it, even though we may not be able to hear it with our ears, it allows the processor to be really, really effective. So, if you're curious, where'd my mouse go? There it is. So this line right here is actually the white noise we're sort of adding in. This dark black line right here is actually the person speaking, the person that we're actually listening to, a human being. And then this dashed line here at the bottom is actually the result of it. So we can really get it under control just by adding some white noise that, is essentially helps the AEC function as good, again, as possible without having to add in more computational power or having to take away from the rest of the AHM. So, and just for completion's sake, the plot right here on the slide is an example of a speech sample with the corresponding frequency spectrum and the frequency response of the whitening filter, which is the dotted one, and the resulting whitened spectrum is the dashed one here at the bottom. So, okay. So then we've got AGC, which is automatic gain control. And this adjusts the far end gain, attempting to just maintain a consistent level from the remote caller. The gain is not altered unless there's actually speech present in the signal. So you can really think of every single block in this chain is its effort to be as efficient as possible with eliminating the echoes coming in that are happening in the local room before going out to the remote caller. That's everything that we're doing right now. And let me check out the chat over here. Bill asked, what was the SR output on the previous slide? SR is sound reinforcement output, and you would use it if you wanted to amplify this local mic in the room as well. So if this was, a decent sized auditorium, and there were some talking heads and we had a remote caller, but we still want the room to hear the people at the front, we would use the SR output to pump that microphone back into the speakers in the room without disrupting the entire AEC chain. So that's what that is. And here we go. If we desire not to make our processing non-aggressive by applying 100 millisecond or 150 millisecond, which is more aggressive, you don't have any control over that. We're just letting you know 150 milliseconds is the maximum time window that we are able to listen for the echo and reduce it. If we went longer than 150 milliseconds, the computational power would get astronomical. But 150 millisecond window is great for getting most echo cancellation out of a decent sized room. So you don't have any control over that, but you do have control over, as I mentioned, we'll hop back over here, over each of those individual blocks and how they're reacting. Okay, and then we've got another. Joe asks, how does the remote caller get signal into the HM? Is VoIP an option? Any third-party USB bridging recommendations for in-room connection to Zoom or Teams? Yes, so you could use something like VoIP, but you would need, as you mentioned, like a third-party connection into it. We're not a standalone VoIP solution. Typically, when I suggest or am helping people do this, it's like a Dante situation where they've set up their whole building maybe running on Dante from Audinate, for those that don't know, and they're using that to get into the AHM. So part of their campus may be using the AEC, but they've also got a performance hall and some other things where the AHM is taking care of everything else. So they're having the whole backbone, the whole audio backbone be over Dante. So hopefully that answers those questions. Let me know if not. Okay, so we were talking about the automatic gain control. Okay, got that. So then we've also got a talk state detector. And so what this does is identifies voice activity and double talk for both the far end and the near end when they're speaking. So it determines one of 4 possible talk states. So we've got the near end speaking and we've got the far end speaking. That makes sense. Then we've also got both speaking, and then we have neither speaking. So this information, like who's actually talking, is passed to multiple other blocks. As you can see right here, we've got these little dashed arrows here. It's actually being passed along to those other blocks, so that when double talk is detected, for example, the adaptive filter doesn't update because it can't distinguish between what a far end echo is and what the local talker is. The filter would like explode. So not literally, of course, but it would not function. So if there's 2 people talking, the adaptive filter says stop updating. There's 2 people talking. But most AEC system block diagrams show at least a double talk detector, so a DTD, double talk. So that way it can again tell the adaptive filter to shut off. But we have 4 different states and we combine them into a talk state detector, just so again for efficiency and quality of service. So next up, we have NLP. Well, what is NLP? So NLP is nonlinear processing, and essentially it implements further processing to attenuate any residual echo. It reduces the primary echo while the adaptive filter is like completing its functions. In a nutshell, it uses a subtraction technique where both the far end and the filter error signals are transformed into the frequency domain. But maybe more importantly, it also incorporates background noise reduction, because background noise can harm intelligibility. I think we kind of know that. When somebody's talking a lot in the background, it's hard to understand somebody who's talking to you. So background noise can harm intelligibility and affect the residual prediction system. So the background noise signature is estimated. And to prevent any genuine speech from affecting the noise estimate, the estimate is only updated when the near end microphone is not active, which is, again, why it's important to have that talk state detector letting us know what state it's in. So no matter how good the adaptive filter is, how big this adaptive filter, how well this adaptive filter is functioning, some residual echo is going to remain. And so this is especially true when the room response is changing. So the easiest way to say, like, if there's a person holding a microphone and running around all over the place, that's constantly changing the room response. Or when the system has just been activated and the filter hasn't had time to actually make the changes. So we use this nonlinear processing block as another step in order for us to reduce not only the primary echo, but again, those residual echoes that may be bouncing off of farther walls, or bouncing off their second or third wall. And then you can see, as I mentioned, then we've got that sound reinforcement output. Then we've got the ducker. So I think most of us have probably seen a ducker before, but a ducker, in its essence, basically lets a signal through and ducks something else. So if we have, like on the AHM, we have duckers on our output buses, our zones. And so when it senses that one particular input that I've told it to look out for, let's say an announcement mic, I have told my output bus, my zone, to quiet down when the announcement mic has signal in it. And this same kind of deal is working. So this decker actually uses the talk state information from our talk state detector to reduce the level of residual echoes for the far end only activity, which is why it's also after this SR output. So basically, to put it another way, we can use the ducker to quiet the local room mic down when the talk state detector notices that only the remote caller is talking. And that makes sense logically, right? Like, well, if the near end isn't talking and we're only the remote talkers lecturing or something, we don't want to hear, we don't need to hear the local room mic. It's just them going. So we duck it. Then we have comfort noise. So the comfort noise adds noise in the return path, so out to the remote caller, so that they don't hear total and complete silence, which can be very uncomfortable for some, and others may think the line's being disconnected. I mean, if you've ever been on a phone, it's never totally quiet, right? So this is just a way for us to have a very natural, unoffensive sound that we can also adjust the level of, just so it's in there. One, to make sure the remote caller understands that they're not disconnected, they are still on the line and it's okay. And that it's, again, all in the effort to make the AEC function as efficient and best as possible. So I'll show you this slide one more time. So again, we can, if you're popping in, maybe you're working on offline mode or you're just getting started with the AEC, I can turn on and off all of these different functions, and I can adjust the aggressiveness of each processing block. And our goal is to have the smallest number possible while still getting the result that we need. So, okay, that was loads of information. That was a lot. So I want to make sure I open the floor for any questions, anything that may have been unclear, and I will do my absolute best to answer those. Any questions, anything at all? I'll go back over here. Let's hang out on this one, this slide. Okay. People may just be furiously typing in the chat, but I will keep this open. I know this has been, again, loads of information, but hopefully has introduced you to the idea of what an AEC, what an acoustic canceller does, and how it functions, particularly how it relates to AHM64 and that processor. So if you don't have any more questions and you just want to sit and stew on this for a little bit, that's absolutely fine. Oh, and there we go. Okay, so will you be showing input and output connectivity? Not live. That is extremely difficult for me to set up by myself in a room, just like in my office. But if you're curious, Bill, and you want to ping me an email, or if you type it in here, I'll grab your email and you and I can get on a call and I'll try to like set it up so I can show you. So, but the type of connectors, get that out of here. The type of connectors on the back of the AHM is Phoenix. So you could use that. Let me see if I've got a picture. I think I've got one hanging around here someplace. Let's see here. Here we go. It's from my IO one, but here's a picture of the back. Phoenix connectors, but typically in these systems, people would use Dante. So let me zoom back over here, and I saw a couple of other questions. Let's go right here. Okay. Yes, it's complex, but it's a lot of fun. I have done a fair bit of research and talking to our R&D team, who are just the absolute best, and it can get rough, but it's fun, and it's an extremely amazingly useful technology. It's just one of those weird advanced ones. Like when you start talking about transfer functions and other stuff, it can get hard. Okay. Day says, QSC QSys has the ability for you to design AEC for their devices. In that case, would you disable the AEC feature when integrating with AHM? Really depends on how you'd like to set it up. If you want to use QSYS, you could. But if you already have the AHM installed and you're using it with it, I don't see why you wouldn't just use the AHMs. But I guess that would depend on the system and how large it is, and if you wanted to use the QSYS like purely for AC and like just use all of its processing and only dedicate it to AEC, I suppose you could do that. But again, I'll say if you're doing the HM, like you can use AEC and still have your processing fully available. So, okay. All right. Bill, it sounds like I answered your question. That's good. Let me know if I wasn't clear, or again, feel free to send me or an email or drop your email in, and you and I can chat and walk through it later if you'd like. I love talking about nerdy things, so that'd be fun. AHM versus others AEC. I mean, obviously AHM is the best, but I haven't listened to biamps AEC personally, so I can't tell you. I haven't done an A/B back to back, but I'm more trusting of ours again because we've developed a separate processor specifically to do this job. And I know that the rest of our audio processing is head and shoulders above biamps. It really, when we go down to system processors and matrices, nobody's even touching the AHM, and nobody's running at the, there's only maybe like one other one that's running at the same sample, right? And it's not new. It's very old at this point, and it's not biamp. So as well as having other things like our preamps have a much better signal to noise ratio, and our outputs have relays and things like that on them. So it's really not of a question about AEC versus AEC, other than purely processing. We've allowed it to all happen on a separate chip. But it's really the conversation of like, well, everything surrounding the AEC is making a huge difference. So that was probably way more than you wanted, Bill, but there you go. Okay, got another question. Let me read this. Would you use an AEC in conjunction with conferencing platform like Teams or Zoom, and how would you arrange the audio path? Absolutely. I would just turn it off, turn off their version of it so that we could take full control over it. Because as I said at the beginning, when you're using theirs, you're completely dependent on whatever they're doing, and you don't have, it's either on or it's off. And with ours, you do have control. So the audio path would, particularly over something like Dante, it'd probably use Dante Virtual Sound Card, outputting from Zoom into over Dante to the AHM, where we're doing all of the processing, and then sending it back out over Dante Virtual Sound Card into the computer. So that's how I would set that up, Marty. Okay, any other questions? Still got, everybody's still hanging out. Let me take a sip of my tea here. Okay, well, it's 11:34, so I appreciate you guys coming and hanging out. Again, we've got, I'm doing next week's mini masterclass, and then we're going to be kicking off the 5th semester. There shouldn't be any breaks, and we've got the next couple of months actually planned out. So look out for that calendar. And if you guys ever have any ideas or topics you would like to explore more, never hesitate to reach out. I'll make sure to drop my email in here and sound. So if you ever have a question, you ever have anything that you're curious about or a topic you want to explore more, please, like, I'm here as a resource for you all, so never hesitate on that. But otherwise, thank you guys for hanging out. It's been fun. Hopefully this has been informative, and I'll hang out here again for a little while just to answer any lingering questions, AEC related or otherwise. And yes, happy Thanksgiving, Brad. Thank you. They said, can we have the chart? I will put it, it'll be in the white paper, and I'll put that in my Q&A email that goes out. So yes, you will get that. All right, Les, you have a wonderful Thanksgiving as well, and I will see you next week.